There is this massive misconception in the startup world. We see it all the time. People think the hardest part of building a successful company is, well, just creating a great product.
Oh, yeah, the whole build it and they will come mentality.
Exactly. There's this really romanticized image of founders in a garage, right? Writing brilliant code or inventing some revolutionary physical widget. And the assumption is that the product is like a golden key.
Right. You build the ultimate key and every door will just magically swing open for you.
Yeah, but in reality, having a working product is, it's really just the starting line.
Yeah.
You quickly discover that you are holding this brilliant, meticulously crafted key, but you're just standing in an empty field with absolutely no idea where the door actually is.
It's a dangerous trap for founders, honestly, because at a certain point in a company's growth, the existential crisis shifts entirely.
Right.
The fundamental question stops being, does this piece of technology work in our testing environment? And it suddenly becomes, how on earth do we reach the massive consumer base?
Yeah, how do you plug into the monolithic distribution channels that would actually make this product matter at a global scale?
Exactly.
Which brings us to the core of what we are diving into today. We have a fantastic piece of source material. It's an article by Shish S., published on May 27th, 2026, and it's titled, How Startups Gain Access to the World of Enterprise, Retail, and Consumer Goods.
It's a really great breakdown of the current landscape.
There really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to shortcut your understanding of this massive, honestly sometimes terrifying gap between startup innovation and corporate scale.
Yeah, and we're going to look at how entirely new structured corporate programs are building, like massive bridges over that gap.
Okay, let's unpack this. Getting inside giant organizations. I want you, the listener, to think about your own workplace for a second. Whether you're clocking in at a super nimble, move fast and break things startup, or a sprawling legacy corporation.
Right, just think about how those two worlds seem to operate in entirely different realities.
They seem to speak entirely different languages.
They do. They operate on fundamentally different physics.
Yeah.
And, to truly understand why we need these new bridge programs that the author outlines, we first have to establish the mechanics of why that gap exists in the first place.
Right. Why is it so hard?
Well, for a startup trying to break into retail or consumer packaged goods, what we call the CPG industry, the barrier is almost never the quality of their software or their physical prototype.
Really? What is it then?
The barrier is institutional access.
Ah, because the organizations that control the grocery store aisles, the ones that control the global supply chains and hold those massive consumer databases, they are incredibly guarded.
Highly guarded.
It's less like a speedboat trying to catch up to a massive moving cargo ship and much more like a medical organ transplant.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to frame it.
Yeah, like the startup is a healthy, highly innovative new kidney. It could genuinely help the patient, but the enterprise corporation has this massive corporate immune system.
Yes, the maze of procurement officers.
Exactly. Procurement, legal departments, IT, security reviewers. And that system is biologically programmed to reject foreign bodies, no matter how good the underlying technology actually is. But I have to push back a bit here.
Sure.
Are these corporations just being stubborn? Like, are they just resistant to change, or is there a valid reason they make it so hard for startups to get in?
What's fascinating here is that this corporate immune system is rarely driven by stubbornness or some lazy desire to maintain the status quo.
Okay.
It is entirely about risk management. It's about the cascading cost of a misstep at a global scale.
So the stakes are just that high.
Exactly. When a multinational corporation changes an internal process, even slightly, the ripple effects are staggering.
Yeah.
If a massive global retailer integrates a startup's new inventory management tool and it contains a single critical bug.
Just one bug.
Yeah, just one. We aren't talking about a minor inconvenience. We are talking about thousands of retail checkout systems going offline simultaneously. Millions of dollars in lost revenue per hour. Catastrophic brand damage. So the caution is baked into the enterprise's DNA as a vital survival mechanism.
I'm listening to this, and honestly, a part of me is still wondering if these legacy giants are just making up arbitrary hoops to jump through, to protect their own internal development teams. I mean, is there always a legitimate reason they need a 6-month compliance audit for what might be a fairly simple software tool?
I get why it might look arbitrary from the outside, but consider the data privacy regulations a massive corporation has to comply with globally.
Right, GDPR and all of that.
Exactly. A simple software tool might inadvertently route customer data through an unverified server. And that triggers a massive international compliance violation.
Oh, I see.
They quite literally cannot afford to just try things out on a whim. And this incredibly high-stakes environment is why intermediaries have become so crucial to the startup ecosystem.
Right, because doing it alone is nearly impossible.
Yes. The source material highlights Microsoft for Startups Pegasus as a prime example of this dynamic. Programs like Pegasus are engineered precisely to bypass that corporate immune system by transferring trust.
Because a startup founder cold emailing a massive retail CIO is going to spend 3 years just trying to get past the spam filter, let alone navigate a security audit.
That is the reality. But an intermediary like Pegasus provides what is called co-selling infrastructure.
Co-selling, meaning they pitch together.
Essentially, yes. The startup isn't knocking on the front door alone. A Microsoft representative who already has a 10-year trusted relationship with that enterprise's IT buyer basically walks the startup software into their quarterly review.
Oh, that's huge.
It is. It places the startup inside a pre-approved, highly trusted vendor ecosystem. The intermediary vouches for the startup's technical credibility. It proves that the barrier was merely access, not capability.
But relying on a massive matchmaker like Microsoft still means dealing with an enterprise that might not actually be structurally ready to work with a tiny company. So have the legacy brands themselves actually changed their internal DNA to meet startups halfway? Are they building their own doors rather than just waiting for Microsoft to hand over the key?
Yeah, and that is the massive shift we are seeing right now. Over the past few years, leading brands have realized they are losing a competitive edge by keeping the gates locked.
Okay.
They also learned the hard way that throwing up a generic innovation portal on their corporate website.
Oh, where startups just submit a PDF pitch deck into a black hole.
Exactly. It simply does not yield results. So instead, they are dismantling those portals and replacing them with highly structured internal programs. Programs designed for genuine, in-the-trenches co-development.
The source mentions a few of these, and the mechanical shift in their strategy is genuinely impressive. They're completely abandoning the concept of general invitations to, just innovate with us.
Right, no more vague ideas.
And instead, they are organizing these programs around hyper-specific, scoped operational problems. PepsiCo Labs is the prime example the author brings up.
PepsiCo Labs completely redefines the engagement model. They have absolutely no interest in hearing a conceptual promise or looking at a sleek slide deck.
Right.
They demand to test emerging technologies against live, bleeding-edge business problems. If a startup claims to have a better predictive algorithm for crop yields or a more efficient routing system for delivery fleets,
PepsiCo Labs actually puts that solution into a live operational environment.
yes. And if it survives that gauntlet, they begin deploying it with the prospect of scaling it globally across their entire infrastructure.
Wait, so instead of just presenting a conceptual promise in a boardroom, these startups are essentially handed the keys to the factory to run a real operational test.
That is exactly what is happening, and it provides validation in context.
The scale of that is hard to wrap your head right around. They are plugging their code into actual global supply chains, integrating with thousands of logistics partners, and facing the unpredictable chaos of actual consumer behavior.
And the educational value for those founders is simply astronomical. You cannot simulate that kind of friction in a laboratory or through secondary market research.
No, definitely not.
General Mills takes a very similar, highly structured approach with their program, which is called 301 INC. It operates as their dedicated external venturing platform.
Okay, so like an in-house venture capital firm.
Sort of, but unlike a traditional venture capital firm that just hands over a check, 301 INC is specifically engineered for startups bringing meaningful technology or business model innovation directly to the food and consumer goods industry.
Man, this solves that cold approach nightmare perfectly. Trying to cold email your way into General Mills, one of the largest food conglomerates on the planet, is an exercise in pure futility.
Without a clear entry point, you're just shouting into a void of corporate bureaucracy.
Right. You have no idea if you should be talking to marketing, IT, or supply chain logistics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
301 INC functions as that definitive, organized entry point. But more importantly, it curates the internal audience. If you are a tech startup working on advanced retail data analytics, 301 INC doesn't just pass your name to an innovation executive.
Who do they pass it to?
They connect you directly with the specific category managers. To put that in perspective, a category manager isn't just a mid-level employee.
Right.
They are the individuals who decide exactly which 50 cereals or snacks make it onto a major supermarket shelf. They control millions of dollars in revenue. 301 INC puts the founder face-to-face with the functional leaders who actually have the power to evaluate, fund, and deploy the technology.
Exposing founders to that level of operational reality must be a massive shock to the system. I mean, they probably walk in with a 6-week deployment timeline in mind, only to learn that an enterprise supply chain operates on an 18-month planning cycle.
Oh, absolutely.
They get to see firsthand that the standards for what counts as a working product in a global corporation are exponentially higher than what passes for working in a beta test.
Definitely. So we've established how the massive food and CPG brands are navigating this, prioritizing huge logistical networks and massive volume.
Right.
But we have to look at industries where the core metrics of success are fundamentally different. What happens when the primary asset isn't volume, but extreme exclusivity and flawless brand reputation?
That brings us straight into the luxury sector. The article focuses heavily on LVMH and their Startups and Tech Partners program.
Yes.
In the world of high luxury, the standards are incredibly delicate. If a premium mass-market food brand has a slight packaging error, it's an annoyance. But if a legendary luxury house has a traceability scandal or even just a clunky digital customer experience,
It fractures the aura of the entire heritage brand.
exactly. The cost of a misstep there isn't just lost inventory, it's the degradation of a 200-year-old identity.
And LVMH constructed its startup program to protect against that exact fragility. Instead of a centralized tech deployment, they connect startups directly with individual maisons.
The specific autonomous houses or brands operating within the massive LVMH conglomerate.
Exactly. And they do this based on highly targeted operational challenges. Things like elevating the in-store customer experience, ensuring absolute supply chain traceability for raw materials, or advancing sustainability metrics.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The author points out the psychological framing of the LVMH program. They actively avoid positioning these tech startups as external vendors brought in to fix the plumbing or upgrade a database.
Right. It's not a vendor relationship.
They treat them as co-designers. They invite these founders into the fold as genuine partners who have a meaningful role in shaping how the luxury business evolves for the next century.
That framing completely alters the dynamic of the relationship. It elevates the interaction from a purely transactional vendor evaluation into a deeply collaborative, almost atelier-style design process.
Oh, wow.
The partnership typically initiates with intense proof-of-concept work and actual design workshops. This ensures the technology perfectly aligns with the brand's aesthetic and operational standards before they even discuss a wider rollout.
The practical advantage for a startup operating in that environment is staggering. If your software performs flawlessly with one maison, say Dior, you instantly bypass the corporate immune system for the rest of the conglomerate.
You do.
You have a significantly clearer, heavily endorsed path to expanding your technology across the entire LVMH group, rather than starting from zero with 70 different luxury brands.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that the landscape is expanding beyond just these one-on-one bilateral programs like LVMH or PepsiCo.
Right, there's more to it now.
An entirely new layer of infrastructure is taking shape. The source extensively covers multi-partner platforms, specifically highlighting plug-and-play brand and retail.
So rather than a startup building a relationship with just one corporate giant at a time, a platform like Plug and Play creates a shared ecosystem where multiple massive corporations are constantly scouting.
Yes.
It reminds me of a highly curated, incredibly high-stakes speed dating event for enterprise technology.
The speed dating analogy captures the energy perfectly.
Yeah.
But the true mechanical value lies in what the author refers to as the matching process.
How so?
A multi-partner platform isn't just hosting a convention where people trade business cards. They are executing highly engineered introductions. Plug and Play actively catalogs the specific, immediate use cases that corporate teams are desperate to solve.
Okay.
And they filter the startup ecosystem to find the exact match.
Meaning, if a startup has developed an advanced artificial intelligence for predicting supply chain bottlenecks, they aren't just tossed onto a stage to pitch to a room full of innovation directors who have no actual buying power.
Exactly.
Plug and Play walks them directly to the specific operational vice president who has been losing sleep over supply chain bottlenecks for 6 months. The person who actually needs that AI, and, crucially, who controls the budget to write a check that very afternoon.
It rescues the startup from the dreaded innovation theater. Those endless meetings that look productive but never lead to a contract.
Right.
And it places them onto a definitive track toward a concrete, funded project with an internally aligned buyer.
Let's follow that trajectory then. The matchmaking is successful. The startup gets accepted into one of these deep integration programs, whether it's through the bilateral LVMH route or the multi-partner plug-and-play network.
Okay.
From the outside, the obvious goal of all of this is the commercial contract. The startup wants to get paid, and they want to scale their revenue. But the source material revealed a truly counterintuitive dynamic.
It really does.
It argues that the most visible benefit, the actual revenue from the contract, might fundamentally be less valuable over the lifespan of the company than the invisible benefits they acquire.
This raises an important question about what these founders are genuinely extracting from these corporate engagements.
Right.
A pilot contract and the associated revenue is essential for survival, certainly. But by embedding themselves inside a massive legacy organization, founders are forced to undergo an intense education in the hidden curriculum of the enterprise world.
The hidden curriculum.
Yes. These are operational mechanics that are genuinely impossible to learn from reading a textbook or listening to a seminar. They gain verifiable credibility.
You're talking about the agonizing administrative realities. Enduring the 60-page procurement vendor onboarding process, passing the brutal IT security and compliance audits, figuring out how to integrate a modern cloud-based API with a legacy database that hasn't been updated since 1998, navigating an internal approval chain that requires signatures from legal, finance, and operations.
And those administrative realities are the actual mechanics of how enterprise software gets deployed. It dictates whether it survives the transition from a pilot to a permanent fixture.
Yeah.
A staggering number of promising startup enterprise relationships completely implode in that treacherous gap between signing the initial pilot agreement and actually achieving a live working deployment.
I'm listening to this description of endless audits and legacy database integration, and a part of me is wondering if we are losing the plot.
What do you mean?
Well, does this mean the best, most innovative product doesn't actually win the market? Does the winner just end up being whichever startup founder has the highest pain tolerance for mind-numbing corporate bureaucracy?
I can see why it feels that way.
It sounds like these legacy organizations are simply selecting for bureaucratic endurance rather than actual technological breakthroughs.
It is easy to view it as a paperwork contest. But that perspective fundamentally misunderstands how enterprises calculate value.
Okay, explain that.
Surviving that bureaucratic gap, proving the ability to integrate your software seamlessly without breaking existing systems, and satisfying the compliance requirements, that operational resilience is a core feature of the product itself. A brilliant market-defining algorithm that cannot pass an enterprise security audit is completely useless to a massive retailer. Founders who endure this hidden curriculum emerge permanently transformed.
That makes sense.
They walk into their very next enterprise pitch, not just with a good idea, but with a highly realistic, proven roadmap of what implementation actually demands.
So the ability to survive the corporate immune system becomes your greatest competitive advantage. And that perfectly sets up the concept of compounding credibility that the article dives into.
Exactly.
Let's walk through that scenario. A startup successfully deploys their software globally with PepsiCo. They survived the audits, the legacy integration, all of it. When they go to pitch their second massive enterprise client, the entire dynamic of the room has shifted.
The dynamic shift is absolute. When you sit down with that second enterprise prospect and casually mention that your technology is currently managing live inventory across PepsiCo's global infrastructure, the atmosphere relaxes immediately.
Because you already proven yourself.
Right. You have essentially answered their most terrifying question. Will this startup break our company? Before they even have to ask it. The procurement officers breathe easier. The IT security team knows you've already passed a standard as rigorous as their own. In categories where systemic reliability is the primary concern, that verified brand association dramatically compresses future sales cycles. Because the enterprise scale question is already answered. A process that might have taken 12 months of agonizing due diligence can easily shrink to 3.
And from that beachhead of credibility, the startup focuses purely on aggressive distribution. The initial pilot program expands into a regional rollout across North America. That regional rollout performs well and expands into a sustained multi-year global contract.
Yes.
Suddenly, the startup's technology isn't just an interesting external tool being tested. It is deeply, inextricably embedded into the long-term foundational infrastructure of a multinational corporation.
And ripping it out would be more painful than keeping it.
Exactly. That level of integration provides an unbelievable commercial moat.
It generates immense commercial stability for the startup. But to actually navigate from an initial meeting to that level of global embeddedness, founders must follow a very specific operational blueprint.
Which the source material outlines for us.
Right. First, a founder must walk through the door with a meticulously defined understanding of the specific operational problem they solve. And they must know exactly whose budget that problem falls under.
No more sweeping theoretical visions of changing the world. You have to bring immediate, concrete evidence that your solution works under analogous high-pressure conditions.
Second, the mindset surrounding the initial pilot must change. The pilot must be treated as the delicate beginning of a complex working relationship, not a standalone transactional project to be quickly delivered and invoiced.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. Enterprise functional leaders are desperate for partners who are genuinely invested in understanding their unique operational context and who possess the agility to adapt their technology to fit those constraints. That requires deliberate attention and the slow, consistent building of interpersonal trust.
That requires an enormous allocation of time and organizational focus from a small, early-stage company. You have to be deeply willing to understand how a massive, entirely different kind of organism makes its internal decisions.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most crucial piece of advice for navigating this landscape mindset.
Right.
A founder must approach the agonizingly slow, complex learning process of enterprise integration with relentless curiosity rather than frustration.
Curiosity over frustration.
Yes. Founders who replace the urge to complain about bureaucracy with a genuine desire to map and understand it emerge with a materially stronger, more resilient company, regardless of whether that specific initial partnership continues.
It is incredibly difficult to practice when you are waiting 6 weeks for an email reply, but it is undeniably the winning strategy. And for those listening who want to explore this expanding landscape of structured access further, the source listed several other active programs worth researching beyond PepsiCo, General Mills, and LVMH.
What were the others?
You should look into Care for Restart, W23, which operates as a global grocery retail venture fund, H&M Group Ventures, and Tesco Labs. The corporate doors are being built, and the pathways are becoming significantly more structured.
The chaotic era of relying entirely on serendipitous personal introductions, golf course networking, and informal handshake arrangements is rapidly fading.
Thank goodness for that.
Truly, dedicated internal teams and highly structured evaluative processes are now the absolute standard on the enterprise side. These programs offer a genuine, well-lit path inside, provided the startup approaches the opportunity with the operational seriousness that functioning at global scale demands.
So, what does this all mean? For you listening, I want you to think about how you approach massive, incredibly complex institutions in your own daily work or personal life.
Yeah.
How often do you hit a wall of seemingly pointless bureaucracy, throw your hands up, and just get consumed by frustration? What if you actively applied that curiosity over frustration mindset?
It makes a huge difference.
What if, instead of just complaining about the friction, you took a step back and tried to map the internal risk management mechanics of the corporate immune system you are dealing with? Understanding why the wall was built is usually the fastest way to figure out how to climb over it. It might fundamentally change how you navigate the roadblocks in your own career.
Reframing the friction as a feature of a complex system, rather than a personal attack on your momentum, is a remarkably powerful way to approach any systemic challenge. Unlocking the why behind the bureaucracy is the very first step to mastering it.
I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over based on everything we've unpacked today. We are watching these massive legacy enterprises rely increasingly on these highly structured startup programs to handle their actual bleeding-edge innovation.
Right.
If this trend continues accelerating, will the future megacorp simply cease to be an innovator at all? Will massive corporations evolve into giant, hollowed-out administrative, compliance, and distribution shells?
That is a wild thought.
Imagine a future where a legacy brand acts as nothing more than a massive, regulatory plug-and-play motherboard, doing nothing but plugging in a constantly rotating fleet of agile, independent startups to execute all the actual forward-thinking work. If the giant corporate ship is entirely powered by hundreds of tiny external engines, who is really steering the global economy? Something to think about. Until next time.